In the early months of 1817, the forest did not yield. It did not thin. It did not open. It remained as it had been when they first arrived, dense, enclosing, and resistant to change. For Abraham Lincoln, now in his 8th year, the land no longer represented arrival. It represented obligation. What had been entered in the winter had to be altered in the months that followed. The half-faced camp, which had carried them through the first cold season, remained standing. But it no longer marked the limit of what was required. It marked only the beginning. He would later recall it plainly. It was pretty pinching times. At first in Indiana, Lincoln said, getting the cabin built and the clearing for the crops. Those words, spoken years afterward to a friend on the road, did not elaborate. They did not need to. They described what the early months of 1817 actually were. Pinching times. Not metaphor. Not sentiment. Simply the accurate name for what was lived. Morning came without ceremony. Light filtered slowly through the branches above, not in broad beams, but in fragments. Thin, broken lines that touched the ground only where the canopy allowed. The earth beneath remained uneven, layered with leaves that had fallen long before the Lincolns had arrived. Beneath those leaves, roots spread outward in every direction, unseen but present, holding the forest in place. Nothing in that space was incidental. Everything resisted change. The work began where it always began, at the edge, not the edge of the forest itself, for there was no such boundary, but at the edge of what had already been disturbed. Where a tree had fallen, light entered. Where light entered, space could be imagined. And where space could be imagined, it could be made. Thomas Lincoln did not approach this work as a man improvising his survival. He approached it as a craftsman. Each tree was not merely cut. It was read. The grain, the lean, the balance of its weight. All of it considered before the first strike was made. The axe did not fall at random. It followed intention. He had come to Indiana with better carpentry tools than most settlers carried. He knew what he was doing with them. And that knowledge was not separate from the work. It was the work. For Abraham Lincoln, this was instruction without explanation. He watched before he acted. He observed the angle of the blade, the rhythm of the swing, the way the wood responded, not only to force, but to precision. The sound of iron meeting timber became familiar, not as noise, but as pattern. At first, his role was small. Branches dragged, brush cleared. The smaller growth, the underbrush and briar that filled the spaces between the larger trees, became his responsibility. It was work that required persistence more than strength. The thorns caught at clothing. The roots resisted removal. Nothing came free without effort. And yet, over time, that effort changed the ground. Spaces widened. Paths emerged. The forest did not disappear, but it began, in small ways, to loosen. He had, as he would later recall, been large of his age. And because of that, the expectations placed upon him were not delayed. An axe was placed into his hands, not as a symbol, not as a ceremony, but as a tool. It was not sized for comfort. It was not adapted to childhood. It was simply the instrument required for the work. At first, the weight defined the motion. The swing lacked control. The blade struck where it landed, not always where it was intended. Wood did not split cleanly. It resisted, absorbed, redirected. But repetition altered that. Grip adjusted. Balance shifted. The motion became less about force and more about direction. This was not a single moment of transformation. It was accumulation. Strike after strike. Day after day. The forest taught through resistance. And in that resistance, he learned not only how to cut, but how to persist. The labor did not isolate him from his father. It bound them. Thomas Lincoln worked not apart from his son, but alongside him. The distance between instruction and imitation narrowed through proximity. What was done could be seen. What was seen could be attempted. There were no formal lessons, but there was continuity. The same actions repeated across hours, across days, across weeks. The clearing expanded, not dramatically, not in a way that could be seen from a distance, but enough that the ground nearest the shelter began to change character. Light reached it more consistently. The soil, once concealed beneath leaves and shade, began to dry in places where it had remained damp. It was within this space that the next structure would rise. Not immediately, not all at once, but inevitably. The half-faced camp had served its purpose. It had protected them through arrival. But it was not designed for permanence. Its open side, which had allowed the fire to provide warmth, also allowed the cold to enter without obstruction. It defined a boundary, but not a barrier. A different structure was required, one that could hold heat, one that could enclose, one that could separate the interior from the surrounding forest. The work of building began even before the clearing was complete. Logs were selected, not simply cut, selected, straight trunks, free from excessive twist, capable of being shaped into walls that would align, hold, and endure. Here, Thomas Lincoln's skill as a carpenter became visible in a different way. Cutting trees was labor, shaping them was craft. The broad axe did not swing in the same rhythm as the felling axe. It required control. It required precision. It required an understanding of surface. Each log, once brought down, was hewn, its rounded exterior cut into flat planes. The goal was not aesthetic. It was structural. Logs that fit together tightly held out wind. They created a barrier that the half-faced camp could not. For Abraham Lincoln, this introduced a different dimension of work. Not only effort, but refinement. He saw the difference between wood as it grew and wood as it could be made to serve. The transformation was deliberate. Each cut removed what was unnecessary. Each surface brought the log closer to its purpose. The ground upon which the cabin would stand remained uneven. It was not cleared to perfection. It was cleared enough. And upon that ground, the walls began to rise. One log placed upon another. Corners joined through notching. Each cut measured so that the weight of the structure itself held the logs in place. No nails were required. Only fit. Only gravity. Only precision. The shape of the cabin emerged slowly. At first, only a line of logs defining a boundary. Then, as layers increased, a form. Rectangular. Enclosed. Measurable. Approximately 16 by 18 feet. Not large, but sufficient. For Lincoln, this structure represented something distinct from the shelter that had preceded it. It was not temporary. It was intended to remain. The walls rose high enough to enclose, high enough to create interior space that could be separated from the forest. But even as the structure took form, other realities persisted. Water did not move closer simply because the cabin rose. It remained at a distance. Each day, it had to be carried. This task did not diminish as construction progressed. It continued alongside it. A daily movement away from the cabin and back again. Buckets filled, weight lifted, steps repeated. For Lincoln and his sister Sarah, this was not an occasional duty. It was constant. It defined the rhythm of each day as clearly as the work of cutting and building. The distance did not shorten. Only the familiarity of the path increased. And with familiarity came endurance. The cabin walls rose, but the life required to sustain those walls extended beyond them. Food, too, remained tied to effort. Game was taken when it could be, preserved when possible. Cornmeal provided consistency where hunting could not. Ash cakes formed in the embers of the fire. Simple, direct, without excess. The act of eating did not interrupt labor. It supported it, and prepared for its continuation. Within the partially completed structure, the interior remained exposed. Until the final layers were placed, wind moved through the spaces between logs. Light entered through openings not yet sealed. The division between inside and outside existed, but not fully. That division would come later, with sealing, with covering, with finishing. For now, the structure stood as an intention in progress. The roof, once added, altered the space most immediately. It created shade. It interrupted the direct fall of weather. It allowed the interior to exist as something more than an extension of the ground. Holes formed the frame, brush and covering layered above. Not permanent in the sense of later construction, but sufficient. The cabin began to hold, to contain, to define. And within that definition, the first sense of enclosure emerged. Not complete, but present. The chimney rose from the wall in the manner common to cabins of the period. For Lincoln, this introduced another layer of understanding. That safety was not absolute, but could be increased, managed, improved, through effort and knowledge combined. The floor remained earth, uncovered, unfinished. It held the imprint of movement, of footsteps, of tools, of use. It was not separate from the ground upon which the cabin stood. It was the ground, only now enclosed. This, too, was part of the reality of the structure. Not refined, but sufficient. Above, a loft began to take form. Wooden pegs driven into the wall logs created support. A platform laid across them. Elevated space, accessible by ladder from within. For Lincoln, this loft became more than structure. It became position, a place above, removed slightly from the ground, a place that held its own meaning, not in comfort, but in separation, in perspective. From that small height, he could observe the interior of the life below, could watch the day begin and end, could think in a space that was, in its modest way, his own. The cabin was not complete in a single day, nor in a single week. It rose gradually, layer by layer, adjustment by adjustment, each element added in sequence, each element dependent on what had come before. And through this process, the family moved from one form of living to another,